Hey, it's Rich on Planet PE. So we're going to do something a little bit different today, trying to show you what some of my lessons might be like and the things that you can use or maybe try and help within your teaching or within your GCSE PE study. So what we're going to do today is go through interval training and show you how I would teach it using some wonderful resources that lots of you have maybe seen out there from PE Geeks Corner. So if you've not seen them before, he's got a shared Google Drive where you can pick up lots of the resources that he uses, and the icons and the dual coding different bits that he uses are absolutely amazing. So let's get moving looking at interval training from perspective if I was teaching you in the classroom. So we're going to look at exam questions, going to look at some content, and hopefully get you knowing everything you need to know about that term of interval training. Let's get cracking. So I'm going to probably disappear and be quite small depending how I edit this video. So let's get going with the PowerPoint and so you can see what we're doing. If I lose focus along the way, it's because I'm looking at my screen because it's a bit like a live lesson. So the types of training that we've got here use all the different icons. So with dual coding, the idea is that you've got a lot of content, but also you've got the icons to try and help you out. My students are doing quite well with this, and the extra kind of input that we get from the icons is slowly helping them out. So we've got 8 different types of training. So as we go through, we've got the types of training. We're looking at interval training today. In the next video, we'll look at continuous, then circuit, fartlek, weight, plyometrics, static stretching, and altitude training. So the more and more you see these icons, the more and more you get used to these. Hopefully it might just give that little memory trigger, just a quick sort of point in the right direction so you know what you're going to be talking about. So our focus today is all about interval training. So we're going to look at intervals, we're going to understand the type of training and those fitness improvements that we might be able to get with it, and also use that to answer some exam questions. So what is interval training? So interval training is training with periods of rest or intervals. So we'll work very, very hard for a short period of time or even a long period of time, but then there's a clear period of rest, and that is what makes it interval training. So you may go to the theatre and there's a rest in between, and that is what we call an interval. So example number 1, so this AO2 kind of content. So I could do sprint intervals of 30 meters, and I'm going to have 10 seconds rest in between, and I might do that 10 times. So that's something that if, let's say, I was a cricketer, would be absolutely perfect, because I'm going to be sprinting in like my fast bowlers run up, and then I'm having a quick bit of a break where I maybe walk back and then I go again. So it's that point where we have we work and then we rest, and then we work and we rest, and we do that multiple periods of time. So when we look at interval training, we're saying it's intervals with these periods of rest, and our second example is that we could do it a little bit further. So we could look at doing it over 800 meters in intervals, and then we're looking at something along the lines that you could look at the intensity workout. So for instance, 75% of your heart rate, or you could try and do it at the race pace. So therefore that would be something like 800 meter runs with 5 minutes rest in between, and the repeat this time is 4 times. So you do that in 4 different sets. So what the real difference there between that shorter interval and the longer interval is, one, obviously the distance and the time that we're running for, but also the fact that we need more rest. So if I need lots and lots of rest, then obviously that needs to be planned in there. But it's still interval training because I'm doing 800 meters, then having a 5-minute rest. So back to that icon of interval training, keep seeing it over and over again. We can have that interval between 10 seconds or 5 minutes. It could be a short interval, it could be a really, really long interval. It purely depends on what we're trying to improve, and also maybe what type of sports performer we are. So when we're doing these different intensities, when we're doing these different durations, I should say, is that we've got some interval training where it's real high intensity periods at work, and when we then rest, we then rest for those shorter intervals. And this type of training is called HIIT training, so HIIT. So HIIT training is high intensity interval training. Now, we would do this to try and increase in the intensity by using those FIT principles that maybe you might have discussed or watched in previous videos. We're going to do it because it's going to increase our heart rate, so therefore we're going to be having some sort of benefit depending on which threshold of training or different training zone we're working at. And we do it because we can then work in really short, explosive intervals. So that might be really good for certain activities. Let's say I'm trying to improve my power, I'm going to try and improve my speed or my strength. I might do it in really short, ballistic intervals. So that's why we might use HIIT training. So why are we using interval training at all? This is the whole point. So I could use interval training in a few different ways. So I could be a sprinter who's wanting to practice their starts over the first 10 metres, so I could use it in real short intervals that way. I could be a wing attacker in netball, and I'm going to want to improve my speed over the 20 metres so that I can be more competitive in the game, maybe get the ball first, maybe get to the ball before my opponents. I could be a 1500 metre runner who's wanting to try and improve their final 400 metres by maybe 5 seconds. So there's lots of different reasons why. So, within the sport, we can plan intervals to improve lots of different things. So what you want to think about is, what could your fourth example be? So it might be something you put in the comments, it might be something that you try and use and show your teachers, but could you think of a fourth example of how we could use interval training? So we've had the sprinter looking at their first 10 metres of the race, we've had a netballer trying to get quicker over 20 metres, we've got a 1500 metre trying to improve their speed over the last lap, so therefore trying to get maybe a better time. So what can interval training actually improve? So why am I doing it? So it can improve our muscular strength. So by doing these quick intervals, by doing these quick bursts of work or intensity, I can increase my muscular strength. Now, because it's repetitive and it's over and over and over again, I could also improve my muscular endurance. Therefore, I could also maybe improve my power or my speed, because I'm going to be doing these things pretty rapidly and with obviously high intensity and not lots of rest. I could improve my cardiovascular endurance, but obviously that depends on the length of time that I work for, and then obviously the rest that I have in between. So when we're doing interval training, I can do it short and sharp with little rest and little amounts of work, but it's very quick. I could do it for longer periods of time, therefore need longer periods of rest, and therefore that would maybe work my cardiovascular endurance. So these are the sorts of questions that we're going to see about interval training in an exam. So in the exam, we might get something like this. Which of the following best describes interval training? Is it A, hard work using alternate periods of rest and hard work? Is it B, training using a series of different exercises? Is it C, training using a variety of explosive movements? Or D, using weights as a form of resistance? So in this question, guys, what you've got to do is go A, B, C, or D. So let's have a look at the answer, or pause it so you can then give it a go yourself, so you haven't got to wait for me. So the answer is training using alternative periods of rest and hard work. So quite simple, really. So question 2 here, a bit more complicated. So question 2, interval training is a commonly used method of training. State one advantage of using interval training as a method of training. And then question 2 is explain what is meant by the term progression in relation to interval training. So this we've not really focused on in this video, but there's other videos about this that you could use or go and look at. So again, if you're going to do the question, pause it, write it down, and then maybe come back to the answer, which is coming next. So in this answer, you will need to say things along the lines of, well, what is the point of it? Why am I doing interval training? What am I going to gain from it? So we would get a mark for saying it's a mixture of aerobic and anaerobic work, because we've got these points where we can rest, we've got the points where we can work very hard, and they're going to have a mix in there. Because of that, that means there's also a less chance of being bored. It's pretty easy to see when an athlete gives up, which is a great thing for a coach, because obviously as people's intervals become less and less hard work because they're not working as hard, they're not working as quick. That's something to see, which means that then we can easily see or monitor people's progress. So there's lots of other things in there that you could talk about. It says, please allow any other suitable example. So anything which is reasonable about why we would choose to do interval training would be worth it. So it might be some of those examples that we had earlier in there. So the next thing was to say about progression. So if I was gradually increasing what I'm doing, that is what we mean by progression. So I'm gradually making it harder and harder. If I also look at things like reducing the amount of rest I have, that is also making it harder. So that's something else that you could look at. We've then got another question. So This one we've got a slightly different command word. So describe what is meant by interval training for 2 marks, and then we've got using an example, explain why interval training can be an effective method for a games player. So it says use an example, so this is very much going to be AO2 and AO3 kind of content. So let's start with this next one then. So again, if you're going to do the question, pause the video, give it a go, and then carry that on in a sec. So describe what is meant by interval training. What it's asking you to do here is essentially define what we mean. So if you were to say it's times of work followed by times of rest, you would get a mark. We might alternate high intensity with low intensity. Okay, again, we would get a mark in there. You would also get a mark if you were to give an example, for instance, saying it's alternating your sprints by walking, then fixed periods of rest, or to go say something like we're going to sprint for 100 meters, we're going to walk for 100 meters, do that 6 times. So not particularly difficult with that question. The next one, you've just got to talk about here sporting examples. So when would interval training actually be used to then help me in my sport? So in this example, we've gone for something like sprinting for a ball and then jogging back into position. Quite straightforward. Replicates many different game situations and develops the aerobic threshold. So again, we are trying to think about how that interval might increase my speed, therefore how could that actually help me? You could then have suitable examples from your sport, such as getting to the ball quicker, trying to improve your final 400 metres and 1500 metres. So all those things that we looked at earlier. We've then got question 5 here. So question 5, explain how interval training could be used in order to improve an athlete's time for the 1500 metres. We kind of looked at that earlier, didn't we? We said about the fact that we can try and do things like improve our speed, so therefore that last lap becomes important. Now this one is 3 marks, and it's AO2 responses that we're after. So you've got to relate that 1500 metres to the improvements that we get from interval training. So in this one, we know that we're going to be doing maybe some anaerobic work, so therefore that would improve my speed. So I could talk about it develops sprinting or anaerobic fitness. You could talk about the fact that we've got things like we need to have more speed for the end of the race where it's a sprint finish. You could talk about the fact that we're going to use interval training to improve our aerobic fitness, which would mean that you could work harder for longer in the race. You could sustain a fast pace throughout the whole race. So that might be reasons that you use it. So really quick fire ones in there, but you've got the mark schemes in front of you to try and use. But that's the kind of thing that we would talk about in my lessons, that we talk about initially what interval training is. We'd have lots of conversations about how it might be used, how it might help us, and then we try and then answer those questions. But again, those icons in here, just to try and have it as little memory joggers along the way that we're using from the PE Geeks Corner drive that is on out there on Google at the moment. And again, if you follow him on Twitter, there's lots and lots of new things that he's putting on all the time. So a really, really good resource to try and use. So that is us in a nutshell, looking at interval training. So we will have our next one looking at continuous training that will be coming up very, very soon. So if you're new to the channel, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Make sure that you follow us on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram. And if there's anything you need help with, please send me a message and I will help you as much as I can. Cheers.